Paul McCartney on what it was like for him after the Beatles broke up and who it was who kept him going.
Even though John Lennon smiled for the cameras and made the appropriate public statement, he secretly didn't like Paul McCartney. It had to do with something deeper and more agonizing than trivial arguments over music or celebrities. Even though there were a lot of discussions and rumors for a while, we now know why Lennon was so angry. Their relationship was complicated. It was filled with pride, hurt, and unhealed old wounds. Finally, the truth has surfaced, and it alters our perception of their story and the actual disintegration of the Beatles. What was it that made Lennon lose it? Join us in this video as we reveal the details. The real reason. John Lennon hated McCartney. John Lennon talked a lot about what life was like after the Beatles ended. He shared many of his thoughts and feelings about the group, about each member, and about what came after everything changed. He said he was happy to see that the other guys from the band were doing well on their own. He said he always believed that Paul would do just fine, so he didn't worry about him too much. But he said he was really pleased with how Ringo was doing, especially because Ringo didn't always get as much attention as the others when they were all together in the Beatles. Lennon said he liked seeing each of them finding their own way, even though they weren't together anymore. Lennon talked about how he met Paul McCartney in the early days. He said they met through a friend after one of his performances with his first group, the Quarrymen. He remembered being really impressed with Paul when he heard him play 20 Flight Rock by Eddie Cochran. Lennon said Paul could sing it really well, and he knew all the words and chords. That's what made Lennon ask Paul to join the group. He also said George Harrison and Ringo Starr came into the group later because of the connections he and Paul had made. He remembered how they all came together slowly, one by one, and how they ended up becoming something much bigger than any of them had expected back then. Lennon said that Paul was the only person, besides Yoko, that he had worked with for a really long time. He said they had a special kind of working relationship. They wrote a lot of songs together, and they knew how to work side by side. Even though things didn't always go smoothly, and even though they didn't always agree, they made it work for a long time. Lennon said that kind of partnership is rare, and he felt lucky to have had it, even if it eventually came to an end. He said the Beatles didn't break up because they didn't like each other. He said they were just getting bored. He explained that after they stopped going on tour, everything felt kind of the same all the time. They would go into the studio and record, but the excitement just wasn't there anymore. Lennon said they started as a band that played live shows, and that's what made it fun. They played in Liverpool, they played in Hamburg, and they got better and better together. But after all the traveling and the shows stopped, it was like something was missing. Lennon said fame didn't really make them fight. He said they all knew who the fans liked the most. He even joked that Paul was always the favorite, especially with the girls. But he didn't think it mattered that much. According to him, each member of the group had a specific role. The fact that each person contributed something unique was what made it work. Despite his calm exterior, some believe that Lennon had a deep-seated resentment toward Paul. The intense creative rivalry they had during their years together, as well as Paul's polished public image and leadership role in the band's final days, may have made them feel overshadowed. Furthermore, the tumultuous legal disputes and Paul's public announcement of the Beatles' dissolution might have exacerbated Lennon's personal grievances, resulting in a complex mixture of adoration, annoyance, and resentment. If Lennon claimed he didn't hate McCartney, what really went through his mind after the Beatles broke up, and how did he cope with the end of something so huge? Let's learn more. The end of the Beatles. No one expected. When the Beatles ended, Lennon said it felt like a divorce. It was hard, and it was confusing. He said he had doubts about himself. He started wondering if he had really done anything important in the band. So, he went back and looked at all the songs he had written or helped write. He said he wanted to remind himself of what he had done, to see if it still meant something to him. After doing that, he said he started to feel better about himself again. He remembered who he was and what he was good at. He said once he felt better about who he was, he could help Yoko more with her music and her art. He said he became a better partner once he believed in himself again. Lennon said that after some time had passed, all of the guys from the Beatles found their own paths. He said they all grew into their solo careers, and they started making music that fit who they were as individuals. He said they didn't need the group anymore to make something meaningful. Lennon talked about how things were different now that he was making music on his own. He said it wasn't boring because he could work with whoever he wanted. If he didn't like something, he could change it. He said he had that freedom now, and it made things more fun again. He said back when he and Paul were working together all the time, they had a kind of system. They knew what worked, and they used it. But after a while, it started to feel too familiar. Lennon said that made it harder to stay excited about the music. He gave some opinions about the solo albums the other guys made. He said he thought Ringo's Beaucoup of Blues was okay. He liked parts of it, but he also said he probably wouldn't buy it himself. He said the same thing about most of the other albums, too. He admitted that he didn't listen to them much. He even said there were some Beatles songs he didn't like anymore, and even some of his own songs. He said that sometimes he wrote songs just to make money, or because he was too young to really know better. He was honest about it, saying he didn't always love everything he had made. He said he and Paul didn't really talk much after the band broke up, but he didn't hate him or anything like that. He said the lawyers got involved and that made things worse. Lennon thought that maybe if they hadn't involved the lawyers, things might not have felt so bad between them. He said they just needed some space from each other for a while. Even with all the growth and reflection, was there still a deeper tension, something Lennon never fully said out loud about Paul? Stay tuned for more. John Lennon's Reflections and Finding a New Path Through Music. Paul McCartney called Lennon and told him he wanted to do something new, something different. Lennon said Paul told him he was trying to find a new path, kind of like Lennon and Yoko were doing. Lennon understood that, even if it was hard to hear at the time. He also said Paul was always good at public stuff, talking to people, making announcements. He said maybe Paul wanted to be the first to say something about the band breaking up. Lennon didn't blame him, but he did admit it caught him off guard. Lennon said that Paul had been the one who tried the hardest to keep the Beatles together. He said Paul didn't want the band to end. So, when Paul finally let go, it really showed that it was over. Lennon said he didn't feel like fighting it anymore. He just accepted it. Lennon talked about some of the songs he wrote after the Beatles. He said people thought he was writing about the other guys, but really, he was writing about himself. He said songs like Steel and Glass might sound like they're aimed at someone else, but they were often about what he was going through inside. He said he could be really hard on himself in his lyrics. He admitted he sometimes wrote songs when he was angry or upset, but when he looked back later, he saw that they were more about his own pain than anything someone else did to him. He said that was something he had to learn about himself. He had to see that his songs were like a mirror, showing him things he didn't always want to face. But he also said that was part of what made the songs real. He wanted to be honest, even if it wasn't easy. Lennon said that writing music helped him figure out who he really was, especially after the Beatles ended. He said that even when things were hard, he kept going, and that's what helped him grow. If their connection truly ran that deep, so full of closeness, meaning, and maybe even hidden emotions, then what other moments in their lives quietly revealed just how strong that bond really was? Let's find out. The deep connection between John Lennon and Paul McCartney. The relationship between John Lennon and Paul McCartney has been a topic of much talk and many questions over the years. Lots of people have wondered about what kind of connection they really had. Was it just friendship? Were they simply bandmates who got along well? Or was there something more? A deeper connection between them that few people noticed? In addition to being close friends, some have speculated that John and Paul may have had a romantic or queer relationship. Stories, quotations, and life events that cause people to pause and reflect are all sources of this concept. A closer look at John Lennon's words and actions can help us better understand this. John once discussed how one is drawn to a person's mind, intelligence, and potentially fascinating ideas in addition to their appearance. He said it would be very hard to be close to someone without feeling some kind of deeper connection. This is significant because it demonstrates that physical objects were not the only thing that attracted John. It focused on the individual as a whole, their thoughts, feelings, and mental connections. Some believe this suggests that John may have felt more than just friendship with Paul. He may have felt something deeper and unique. One clear example of this is a story John told about a dream he had. In this dream, John said he was touching Paul. Now, most people don't usually share dreams about touching a friend in a way that sounds close or intimate. Usually, friends have dreams about hanging out or doing fun things. But John described a dream where he was physically close to Paul. This is a little unusual, and it makes some people think there was more going on between them than just being friends. John's decision to discuss this dream with Paul raises the possibility that their relationship had a more profound, emotional component. Some things were also observed by Yoko Ono, later John Lennon's partner. She believed that John might have had more than friendship in mind when he showed interest in Paul. This was also observed by others in their lives. Paul was occasionally referred to by those who knew them as John's princess guy. This moniker seems to indicate that John held Paul in high regard, perhaps even as a romantic partner. Many people have believed Paul was straight because of his relationships with women like Linda McCartney. However, when you look at the closeness and the stories about Paul and John, it's clear their relationship was complicated and maybe more than what the public usually thought. Paul McCartney himself said some things that make people think about their relationship differently. Paul talked about how he and John mated together when they were younger. This word choice is strange if you only think of them as friends. It's a word people use to describe romantic or physical closeness. Also, John wrote a play that some people believe was about their relationship. These details add pieces to the puzzle and make people wonder if there was a special bond between them that went beyond normal friendship. In 1964, John and Paul appeared together on a TV show where they acted as Pyramus and Thisbe. These two characters are from a famous story that inspired Romeo and Juliet, and they are lovers in that story. John and Paul wore matching costumes for this role. Some say that this looked like two people claiming a relationship and practicing closeness, such as young people learning a form of romance. What might we learn if we take a closer look at what they said and how they looked at one another? Given that even small choices and moments can have deeper meaning, keep watching for more. Moments and memories that suggest something more. In 1961, another significant event took place. John Lennon received £100 as a birthday present. He took Paul on a private trip to Paris with the money, rather than using it for himself. This journey was intended to be a component of a larger scheme to tour Europe and perform live. But because they had so much fun in Paris, John and Paul ended up staying longer than they had planned. They canceled some other shows so they could spend more time together in the city. People always do this when they feel very close to someone or have special feelings for them, such as canceling work plans to spend more time with them. According to some, this journey demonstrates how intimate and possibly romantic John and Paul's relationship was. When you combine all of these tales and moments, they begin to paint a clearer picture, despite the opinions of those who find these concepts hard to accept or a little unrealistic. The many small signs, words, and moments show that John and Paul might have shared something deeper than just being friends. This changes how many people usually think about them. Instead of only seeing them as bandmates or friends, it seems they had a very close, complicated bond. This bond was not only on personal ground, but also on work ground because it helped them make music together. Looking back, the closeness between John and Paul was a big part of what made the Beatles special. They had a bond that was rare and powerful. Their ability to write songs together and inspire each other came from that deep bond. Whether or not it was romantic, it was very important to both of them. It gave their music a special energy that fans all over the world loved. A lot of fans and experts have tried to understand the true importance of this closeness. Was it affection, or was it something else? It doesn't really matter what tag you give it based on what some people say. The important thing is that John and Paul had a very special and deep relationship. Both their lives and their music were somehow controlled by this relationship. They had a mutual understanding that most people would never have. Some of their complex emotions following the Beatles' breakup can also be explained by this concept. It was difficult to let go of the intimacy they had once had. It was about losing a very special bond, not just about a band breaking up. Without one another, John and Paul had to find out new ways to live and work. Since they had been so close for so long, this was not easy. The relationship between John and Paul is still talked about today. It is among the most popular friendships that is talked about in the history of music. Questions and thoughts are still being raised by the story, remarks, and times they spent together. Fans are still thinking about their true relationship. Was it love? Was it a deep friendship? Was it something in between? What is clear is that John and Paul were more than just bandmates. But after everything they shared, the fame, the music, the bond, what really caused the Beatles to fall apart? And was Paul McCartney truly to blame? To learn more, keep watching. The blame, the tension, and the studio silence. For a really long time, like many, many years, Paul McCartney was the one who got blamed for something huge. That something was the breakup of the Beatles, which was one of the most famous and loved music bands in the world. A lot of people pointed fingers at Paul. They said it was his fault the band split up. And Paul, well, he knew people were saying that. He had been hearing it over and over again for about 30 or maybe even 40 years. That's a very long time to carry that kind of blame on your shoulders. He said it felt like people were always jabbing at him, poking him, pointing at him, making him feel like he was the one who messed everything up. It hurt him deeply, and he remembered it clearly. Paul also talked about the very first time Yoko Ono came into the picture. He said it all started in London. Back then, he was living in a house there. One day, Yoko Ono came to his place. She knocked on his door, and when she came in, she told him that she was collecting papers and writings from artists. She said it was for a project for John Cage's birthday. Now, John Cage was a famous composer. Paul listened to her, but he didn't really want to be part of that project, so he told her no. But he did something else too. He said maybe she should go and talk to John Lennon instead, who lived nearby. She was introduced to John Lennon in this way. Everything changed in that instant. Things became increasingly tense later. Paul recalled that they were writing the song Get Back at one point. Even though things were becoming challenging, the band was still trying to create music at that time. Paul said that John Lennon thought the song Get Back was being directed at Yoko. He believed that Paul was singing it at her, like a message. Lennon thought Paul was giving her looks, staring at her while singing, and that it meant something. Paul said those were very paranoid times. Everyone was worried, everyone was watching everyone else. And yes, Paul said, Yoko was in the studio a lot. He remembered it clearly. Paul explained that usually, the wives and girlfriends of the band members would stop by the studio just for a short while. They would sit quietly in the control room, not where the music was being made. But with Yoko, it was different. She didn't stay in the control room. She would come in and sit right in the middle of everything, sometimes even sitting on an amplifier, which is a piece of equipment that makes sound louder. That made things odd. Paul agreed that they didn't like it, but he never said anything directly to John. Rather, the band just kind of complained quietly. But as Paul McCartney tried to pick up the pieces and move forward, how did the weight of blame, betrayal, and public judgment shape the next chapter of his life and legacy? Keep watching for more. Letting go, finding peace, and moving forward. When someone asked Paul if he blamed Yoko Ono for breaking up the Beatles, he gave a very clear answer. He said no, he didn't blame her. He said that by the time she got involved with John Lennon, things were already changing. John was already starting to move away from the band. He wanted something different in life. He had met Yoko, and he liked how strong and creative she was. Paul said she was an avant-garde artist, which means she made very modern, unusual art. John was very drawn to that. He was looking for something new, something that excited him, and Yoko gave him that. Paul also said that John Lennon really liked strong women. That was just the kind of person he was. His mother had been a strong woman, and so had his aunt. They had raised him. He was used to being around strong female voices. Paul said that John's first wife, Cynthia, had wanted something more traditional. She wanted a quiet life, a calm home, and maybe a family-focused lifestyle. But that just wasn't who John was. He wanted more. He wanted excitement, adventure, and someone who could keep up with his thoughts and creativity. Yoko Ono fit that mold. Paul said that John wanted to completely change his life. He didn't want to just step away from the Beatles. He wanted to start all over. He needed to clear out everything from his past so he could begin again with Yoko. Paul described it like this: John wanted to clear the decks. That means getting rid of everything that might get in the way. Sadly, that included the band. Paul said that John needed to leave the band behind so he could give all his time and energy to his relationship with Yoko. Even though it was hard, Paul said they had to accept it. John and Yoko were very much in love. When someone asked Paul if John had any other songwriting partners besides him, Paul said no, not really. Other than Yoko, Paul was the only real partner John had when it came to writing songs. But Yoko was a big part of John's creative life after the Beatles. She inspired him. She was there during the making of some of his most famous solo songs, like Imagine and Give Peace a Chance. Paul said those songs came from the new world John had found with Yoko. She helped him go in a new direction, and it showed in his music. Even though people thought there might have been bad feelings between Paul and Yoko, Paul said things got better over time. He remembered calling her in the early 1980s. He told her that maybe he had misunderstood her. Maybe he had been wrong in the past. He wanted to fix things, especially now that John had passed away. He didn't want there to be any more bad blood between them. But Yoko didn't want pity. She made that very clear. She said she didn't want anyone being nice to her just because she was John Lennon's widow. Paul respected that. He saw her in a new way. He realized that she was just being herself, a strong, loving, honest person who was doing the best she could. Paul also talked about how they handled business things together. He said that even though they didn't always get along perfectly, they could work together when they had to. When it came to anything related to the Beatles, like re-releasing music or working on projects, they found a way to make it work. Paul ended by saying something very heartfelt. He said that John Lennon was a very, very beautiful person. He felt lucky to have known him and to have worked so closely with him. But when the spotlight faded and the applause quieted, who truly held the pen behind the Beatles' most iconic songs, Lennon or McCartney? Let's delve deeper. Untangling Lennon and McCartney's songwriting truths. John Lennon and Paul McCartney rarely argued during the early songwriting years. Their method was collaborative. Lennon described their process like a back and forth, with one starting an idea and the other continuing it. Both respected each other, and Lennon believed McCartney was a strong writing partner. Many Beatles songs were credited to both Lennon and McCartney, regardless of individual contribution. Some were true collaborations. Others were mainly written by one of them. Despite this, they agreed to always split royalties equally. There were disagreements about who did what on specific songs. In this report, 6 Beatles songs are highlighted, where Lennon and McCartney had conflicting accounts of authorship. They started writing together in 1958. Their first song, according to Mark Lewison, was Too Bad About Sorrows. Lennon suggested all songs written by either of them be jointly credited. Early in their career, most songs were joint efforts. Singles like She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand were true 50-50 collaborations. McCartney mostly wrote All My Loving, and Lennon mostly wrote There's a Place, but both helped finish each other's songs. By 1964, they started writing separately. McCartney wrote Can't Buy Me Love alone in a Paris hotel. Lennon responded by writing several tracks for A Hard Day's Night on his own, including I Should Have Known Better and Tell Me Why. They kept the joint credit rule. McCartney wrote Yesterday alone. Lennon wrote most of his songs for Revolver alone. Despite the growing distance, they still collaborated on at least 4 songs per album through 1969. Their final joint song was Oh Darling, mostly written by McCartney in spring 1969. Lennon described their dynamic in a 1980 Playboy interview, saying McCartney brought optimism and he brought sadness and bluesy notes. He later realized he also wrote melodic songs, such as In My Life. After the Beatles broke up, both men gave different accounts of their songwriting contributions. Lennon discussed his versions in a 1972 Hit Parader article and again in his 1980 Playboy interview. McCartney gave his accounts in the 1997 book Many Years From Now and the 2021 book The Lyrics. Lennon wrote most of it before McCartney arrived. McCartney said he helped with arrangements. In 1965, Lennon described it as a co-write. In the 1970s, he claimed full authorship. McCartney gave varying accounts over the years. In 1984, he said they wrote it together at Lennon's house. In the 90s, he recalled Lennon getting the idea alone and writing it before they worked on it together. McCartney estimated the songwriting split as 70% Lennon, 30% McCartney. He said his main role was creating the counter-melody. McCartney said that John's melodies often stayed on one note, while he preferred more complex melodic changes. He added a descant to help to break up the monotony. When asked if they needed each other to write songs, McCartney said they didn't have to write together, but it helped. He noted that each could catch weak parts in the other's songs and offer honest feedback. Eleanor Rigby was another song with disputed authorship. McCartney came up with the melody while playing piano. The name Eleanor may have come from actress Eleanor Bron. Rigby came from a shop name McCartney saw in Bristol. McCartney wrote the first verse and brought the song to a session at Lennon's house. George Harrison, Ringo Starr, Lennon, and Pete Shotton gave suggestions. In 1972, Lennon claimed to have written 70% of the lyrics to Eleanor Rigby. Pete Shotton, however, said Lennon contributed almost nothing. What do you think about the feud between John Lennon and Paul McCartney? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.